It's a strange and often cruel quirk of history, how some of the most brilliant minds, the true architects of our culture, can simply fade from view. We remember the kings, the presidents, the rock stars who filled stadiums. But what about the quiet geniuses who gave them their words, their melodies, the very soul of their art? What about the poets who never sought the spotlight, but whose whispers changed the world? This is the story of one such ghost, a man whose voice you've heard 100 times without ever knowing his name, a man who handed Elvis Presley one of his most iconic, earth-shattering hits, who mentored Kris Kristofferson, and who kick-started the entire outlaw country movement with a single act of defiance. This is the story of Mickey Newbury, the forgotten father of the modern Nashville sound, and one of the most important songwriters you've never heard of. His tale isn't just about music. It's a story of integrity, of a quiet battle against a machine that chews up and spits out true artists. It's a tragic, beautiful, and profoundly human story about what it costs to stay true to yourself in a world that only wants you to be a product. So pour yourself a drink, settle in, and let me tell you about the man who wrote the soundtrack to an era only to be written out of the story himself. To understand Mickey Newbury, you have to understand the world that made him. He was born Milton Sim Newbury Jr. in 1940 in Houston, Texas, a city humming with the raw energy of oil, industry, and the blues. Post-war America was a pressure cooker of optimism and anxiety. The suburbs were sprawling, televisions were flickering to life in living rooms, and a generation of kids was growing up with the simmering restlessness that would soon boil over into the cultural revolution of the 1960s. Young Mickey was a sensitive and introspective child, steeped in the rich, eclectic sounds of the Texas Gulf Coast. He wasn't just hearing the sanitized pop tunes on the radio. He was absorbing everything. The gut bucket blues drifting out of Third Ward, the lonesome wail of Hank Williams from the jukeboxes, the soaring harmonies of gospel choirs, and the sophisticated storytelling of Tin Pan Alley wordsmiths. This wasn't just background noise. It was the language he would learn to speak. While other kids were playing baseball, Mickey was teaching himself to translate the world into chords and rhymes, filling notebooks with teenage poetry that already held a wisdom far beyond his years. His adolescence was marked by a deep-seated need for expression, a compulsion to make sense of the world's chaos through song. He formed a doo-wop group called the Coquettes, had a minor regional hit, and tasted the first flicker of what it meant to create something that moved people. But the rigid conformity of the 1950s wasn't built for a soul like Mickey's. He was a dreamer, a romantic, and a thinker in a time that often valued none of those things. After a brief and unfulfilling stint at college, he did what many young men of his era did when they felt lost. He joined the military. The Air Force took him far from the familiar sounds of Houston, stationing him in England for 3 years. It was a period of isolation and reflection, a time when the distance from home sharpened his perspective. He spent his nights in quiet barracks, not polishing boots, but polishing his craft, his guitar, his only constant companion. He was honing his unique ability to weave complex cinematic narratives into the simple structure of a 3-minute song. When he finally returned to the United States in the early 1960s, he wasn't a boy anymore. He was a poet with a quiet fire in his belly, and he set his sights on the one place a songwriter could turn his dreams into vinyl: Nashville, Tennessee. When Mickey Newbury rolled into Nashville in 1964, Music City was a well-oiled machine. It was the era of the Nashville sound, a polished, string-laden, pop-friendly version of country music designed to cross over to a wider audience. Producers like Chet Atkins and Owen Bradley were the kings and the system was rigid. Songwriters were cogs in this machine. You wrote a song, you pitched it, a producer picked it for a star, and you collected your check. The goal was a hit, and creativity was often sanded down to fit a proven formula. Into this world walked Mickey Newbury, a man who didn't just write songs, he bled them. He got a job, like so many hopefuls, as a staff writer at the massive publishing house, Acuff Rose Music. For $100 a week, he was supposed to churn out hits on demand. And he was good at it, terrifyingly good. He could write a perfect country tearjerker, a catchy pop tune, or a novelty song at the drop of a hat. In 1968, he achieved a feat that has rarely been equaled. He had 4 top 5 hits in 4 different genres on the charts at the very same time. Think about that. Kenny Rogers and the First Edition were riding high with Newbury's psychedelic-tinged Just Dropped In to See What Condition My Condition Was In, a song so evocative of the era that it would later become iconic in the film The Big Lebowski. Country superstar Don Gibson had a massive hit with the heartbreaking, funny, familiar, forgotten feelings. The R&B charts were lit up by Solomon Burke's soulful rendition of Time is a Thief. And pop singer Andy Williams was crooning Newbury's gentle pastoral, Sweet Memories. It was an unprecedented display of versatility. Mickey Newbury had proven he could master the system. He was the golden boy, the hitmaker every producer wanted a piece of. But inside he was suffocating. The Nashville machine, you see, didn't care about art. It cared about product. And Mickey saw his songs, his intensely personal cinematic creations, being treated like interchangeable parts. He'd write a beautiful, sorrowful ballad, and it would be recorded with bombastic, saccharine strings and a peppy, upbeat tempo that completely betrayed its soul. He felt like a master painter forced to color inside someone else's lines. The frustration grew into a quiet, simmering rebellion. One of his most profound and revealing songs from this period was The 33rd of August. It wasn't just a song, it was a short film, a mood piece about loneliness, disconnection, and the surreal passage of time. He wrote it with a painter's eye for detail. The dusty shade of summer's dust falls on the weeds, a blight of rust upon the yellow withered grass. These weren't your typical I love you, you left me country lyrics. This was literature. But when it was recorded by other artists, it was often stripped of its haunting ambiguity. The ache at its core was glossed over for radio play. This brings us to one of the most pivotal yet rarely discussed moments in his life, a turning point not just for him, but for all of Nashville. It was the late 1960s, and Mickey had finally been given a chance to record his own album. The studio, following standard procedure, had booked a full orchestra and session musicians, expecting to lay down another polished Nashville sound record. Mickey walked in, took one look at the sea of faces and music stands, and felt a familiar dread. He knew they were about to take his fragile, intimate songs and turn them into commercial jingles. So, he did something unthinkable. In an act of quiet, desperate defiance, he paid the entire orchestra and all the session musicians their full day's wage and politely asked them to leave, all of them. In the cavernous, now empty studio, he sat down with just his own guitar, a couple of trusted friends on bass and percussion, and a sound engineer. And in that hushed, liberated space, he began to record what would become his masterpiece. The album Looks Like Rain. He didn't just sing the songs. He wove them together with the ambient sounds of a thunderstorm he had painstakingly recorded, creating a seamless, atmospheric, and deeply personal song cycle. It was moody, introspective, and utterly devoid of commercial compromise. The album was a commercial flop, but to a small, devoted group of listeners and fellow musicians, it was a revelation. It was a declaration of independence. The impact of Looks Like Rain wasn't measured in sales figures, but in the seismic shift it caused beneath the surface of Music City. In the smoky back rooms of Tootsie's Orchid Lounge, a new generation of songwriters was listening. They heard in Newbury's work a permission slip to be themselves. One of those young writers was a Rhodes Scholar and ex-Army helicopter pilot with a poet's soul named Kris Kristofferson. Kristofferson was sweeping floors at the Columbia Record Studio, just hoping for a chance to get his songs heard. He watched Newbury, this quiet Texan who refused to play the game, and saw a blueprint for his own career. Kristofferson would later say, "Mickey was my hero and my mentor. He was the first person I saw who wasn't playing by the rules." Newbury took Kristofferson under his wing, championing his uniquely literary and raw songwriting when no one else would. They would sit for hours at Newbury's home on Old Hickory Lake, a sanctuary for misfit artists, sharing songs, ideas, and a mutual frustration with the Nashville establishment. It was in that very house that another struggling artist, Waylon Jennings, would find his voice. Waylon was a phenomenal talent, but he was being suffocated by RCA Records, forced to record songs he hated with arrangements he despised. He was on the verge of quitting. One night, frustrated and drunk, he ended up at Newbury's house. Mickey sat him down, and instead of giving him advice, he just played him his songs. He played him these beautiful, complex, achingly honest pieces of art. Waylon listened, and something inside him clicked. He saw that a country artist could be an artist, not just a performer. It was a moment of profound awakening. Waylon walked out of that house a changed man. He went back to his label, tore up his contract, and demanded full creative control over his music. The era of outlaw country had just begun, sparked not by a gunfight or a drug bust, but by the quiet integrity of a poet playing his guitar in his living room. But while his friends were becoming superstars, Mickey remained in the shadows, a willing ghost. He had no interest in the fame, the touring, the relentless grind of celebrity. He was a creator, a family man who cherished the peace and quiet of his lakeside home. His joy came from the act of creation itself, and his creations continued to find their way to the biggest names in music. Perhaps the most famous and most misunderstood story is his connection to Elvis Presley. In 1972, Elvis was in a creative and personal rut. His marriage to Priscilla was crumbling, and he was tired of the schlocky movie soundtracks and safe formulaic singles. His manager, Colonel Tom Parker, was forcing on him. He was looking for something real, something that spoke to the turmoil in his own heart. He heard a song that Newbury had written years before, a medley that was a stroke of genius in its own right. Mickey had taken 3 distinct American songs, the 19th century Southern anthem Dixie, the Civil War-era ballad Ora Lee, which had been repurposed as the West Point anthem Army Blue, and the stirring abolitionist anthem The Battle Hymn of the Republic, and woven them together into a single breathtaking piece of music he called an American trilogy. It was a song about the fractured, contradictory soul of America itself, its history of division, and its yearning for unity. It was complex, mournful, and ultimately profoundly hopeful. For Elvis, a Southerner who had become a global icon, the song was a mirror. It captured his own internal conflicts, his love for his roots, and his desire to be a unifying force. When he performed it, it wasn't just a song. It was a theatrical emotional exorcism. His iconic, cape-swirling, fist-pumping performance of an American trilogy from his Aloha from Hawaii special became one of the defining moments of his later career. Millions of people have been moved to tears by that performance, but almost no one knows that its architect was Mickey Newbury. Mickey, in his typical fashion, was reportedly unimpressed by the bombastic, Vegas-style arrangement. feeling it lost some of the quiet historical reverence he had intended. It was the story of his career in a nutshell. His art was powerful enough to create legends, but it was often transformed into something he no longer recognized. Mickey Newbury's refusal to play the Nashville game came at a steep price. His story is riddled with controversies and debates, most of which stem from his fierce, almost stubborn integrity. He was seen by the Nashville Old Guard as difficult, arrogant, and ungrateful. They couldn't understand why a man so gifted at writing hits would actively sabotage his own commercial success. Why would he turn down lucrative tours? Why would he release albums full of rain sounds and melancholy poetry instead of radio-friendly singles? To them, it was madness. To Mickey, it was survival. One of the most poignant anecdotes that reveals his inner world comes from his son, Kris. He recalled that his father was plagued by periods of deep depression. The pressure to create, combined with his disillusionment with the industry, took a heavy toll. He wasn't a tortured artist in the romantic rock and roll sense. He was a deeply sensitive man who felt the world's sorrows acutely and struggled to protect his artistic vision from a world that saw it as a commodity. He once said in a rare, candid interview, "I just can't bring myself to write a song that I don't believe in. It's like lying." For him, a song wasn't just a product. It was a piece of his soul. To sell it cheap, to let it be twisted into something it wasn't, was a form of self-betrayal he couldn't endure. This created a fundamental conflict in his life. He was a provider for his family, and his songwriting was his livelihood. He continued to write for other artists throughout the 1970s and 80s, producing a staggering body of work. His songs were recorded by everyone from Johnny Cash and Roy Orbison to Joan Baez and B.B. King. He was a member of the Nashville Songwriters Hall of Fame, a revered figure among his peers. Yet, to the general public, he remained a phantom. He released his own albums sporadically, each one a masterclass in atmospheric literary songwriting, and each one largely ignored by mainstream radio. The debate over his legacy often centers on this question. Was he a tragic figure who was cheated out of his rightful fame? Or was he a man who made a conscious choice to prioritize his art over stardom? The truth, as is often the case, lies somewhere in between. He was a victim of a system that had little room for his kind of genius, but he was also a willing exile. He built a wall around himself and his family, finding solace not on a stage in front of thousands, but on his boat on Old Hickory Lake, waiting for the muse to strike. There's a beautiful, heartbreaking quote from him that encapsulates this contradiction perfectly. When asked why he didn't tour or promote his work more, he simply said, "I have a mortal fear of being misunderstood." For a man whose entire life was dedicated to the precise, honest expression of emotion, the idea of his work being misinterpreted or cheapened by the machinery of fame was a terror greater than any fear of obscurity. He chose silence over being misquoted. So why does Mickey Newbury still matter? Why should we care about this forgotten poet from a bygone era? Because his story is a timeless and urgent cautionary tale about the conflict between art and commerce, a conflict that rages more fiercely today than ever before. In our current world of algorithm-driven content, viral trends, and manufactured celebrity, the quiet, uncompromising artist is an endangered species. Newbury's life is a testament to the idea that success isn't always measured in platinum albums or sold-out arenas. Sometimes the greatest success is simply creating something true and protecting it with your life. His historical significance is immense, even if it's largely uncredited. Without Mickey Newbury, there is no outlaw country movement as we know it. Without his mentorship, Kris Kristofferson's career might have taken a very different path. Without his songs, the catalogs of Waylon Jennings, Kenny Rogers, and even Elvis Presley would be poorer. He was the catalyst, the quiet force that set a revolution in motion. He was the songwriter's songwriter, the one the greats looked up to. Willie Nelson, no slouch in the songwriting department himself, once said, "There were no better writers than Mickey Newbury." But his impact goes beyond a list of names. He fundamentally changed the DNA of what a country song could be. Before him, the focus was often on a catchy hook and a simple story. Newbury introduced a cinematic, literary quality. He used minor keys, complex chord progressions, and ambient sound to create a mood, an atmosphere. He proved that a song could be a psychological portrait, a philosophical reflection, a piece of short fiction. He elevated the craft, paving the way for the ambitious, album-oriented work of artists like Jason Isbell, Sturgill Simpson, and Chris Stapleton today. They are all, whether they know it or not, the children of Mickey Newbury. We can learn something profound from his stubborn refusal to compromise. In a world that constantly begs us to sand down our edges, to fit in, to sell a polished version of ourselves, his life is a quiet reminder of the power of authenticity. He teaches us that it's better to be a ghost who speaks the truth than a king who sings lies. His songs endure not because they were massive commercial hits, but because they are honest. They feel as raw and relevant today as they did 50 years ago because they speak to the fundamental, unchanging truths of the human condition: love, loss, loneliness, and the search for grace in a fallen world. Mickey Newbury fought his final battle with emphysema, a cruel disease for a man whose art was so tied to his breath and voice. He passed away in 2002 at the age of 62. In the same quiet lakeside home where he had mentored legends and shielded his family from the storm of the music business. He left behind a body of work that is both monumental and criminally overlooked, a treasure trove waiting to be rediscovered. In the end, Mickey Newbury's story is not a tragedy. It's a quiet triumph. He didn't get the fame he deserved, but he got something far more valuable. He got to live life on his own terms. He protected his soul. He stayed true to his muse, and he created a body of work that is as timeless and beautiful as the sound of rain on a tin roof. He was the whisper in the heart of the storm, the poet who gave the outlaws their voice. The next time you hear Elvis belting out an American trilogy, or a character in a movie just dropped in to see what condition their condition was in, take a moment to remember the quiet man from Texas who gave those words flight. Remember the artist who chose integrity over fame and substance over style. History may have forgotten his name, but if you listen closely in the silence between the notes of the songs that shaped our lives, you can still hear the ghost of Mickey Newbury singing his truth. And that's all for today's video. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up, let us know your thoughts in the comments section, and subscribe so you won't miss out on future uploads. See you next time.